Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korea and the U.S. are locked in stalled tariff negotiations, and time is running out. At the center is Washington's demand for a $350 billion investment in exchange for lowering tariffs. But for Seoul, concerns are mounting over currency pressure, capital outflows, and political risk. With the APEC summit just days away, President Trump is holding firm, raising the question, is this really a negotiation or just leverage politics? And how should South Korea respond under such pressure? For a deeper discussion on this, we are joined by Dean Baker, senior economist at the Center for Economic and Policy Research, with insight into what Korea's next move should be. A big welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. So, Dr. Baker, let's start right away. So we're looking at a negotiation process that seems to be in a stalemate. The South Korea-U.S. tariff talks have largely stalled, and the 25% rate remains in place. How would you assess the current status? And do you think there are any realistic signs of movement behind the scenes right now?
Well, I have to say I don't have any inside sources with this administration. I have to say it's a bad time in terms of, rising to the top of the agenda here because we've had a government shutdown since October 1st. So there's an effort, I assume there's an effort to get the government up and running, the funding for the government. I won't go into details on that, but we have a government shutdown. We also, President Trump was just in Israel and Egypt with his peace deal. Which obviously is big news for him, big news. And then on top of that, the renewed conflict with China, where President Trump was threatening 100% tariffs. He then seemed to back away from that. I don't have inside knowledge on that. Long and short, I'm just saying there's a lot of things going on here that have been very much in the news. And the agreement with South Korea is somewhat lower down in terms of its importance or how it's perceived here, at least.
Right. So President Trump definitely seems to have a lot on his priorities right now. So leaving this latest deal to a stalemate. So let's get a little bit deeper into the core sticking point of this latest deal. So Washington's demand for a $350 billion investment package. So from your standpoint, do you think this kind of trade-off, massive capital in exchange for tariff relief, do you think it's economically sound?
I really cannot understand from South Korea's standpoint why that would make sense as an economic deal. So, I mean, just doing the arithmetic on this, Korea's exports to the United States, roughly 130 billion a year. You're not going to zero tariffs. So we're talking about 25% or 15%. So you're buying down the tariff rate at 10 percentage points. And you're paying 350 billion for that. That sounds like a really bad deal. And then on top of that, I should just point out, if it's not already clear, that Trump doesn't feel bound by his deals. So he had a whole set of deals, and then he suddenly decided that I think it was a 50% tariff on heavy trucks. Now, is he going to go through with that? I don't know. I don't think anyone does. But that would violate a lot of the agreements that he already entered into. So if South Korea actually makes some sort of hard commitment, and that's obviously a big issue, how hard is this commitment? But to invest 350 billion to some extent at Donald Trump's discretion, that seems to be like an enormous amount to pay for very, very little benefit. Now, I understand there's also security issues, and again, South Korea has to weigh those. But as an economic matter, that just seems like a horrible deal from the standpoint of South Korea.
Right. So it's definitely more than just an economic deal we're seeing. Now, speaking of the $350 billion investment of the financial side of this, so there's growing concern here that if even a portion of the $350 billion investment ends up being delivered in cash or upfront funding, it could actually drain South Korea's reserves and pressure the won further. In your view, what kind of pressure could that scenario actually place on Korea's foreign exchange market and the broader financial system as well?
Yeah, well, that is an enormous outflow of money. I mean, if you do that in 1 year, that would be, I don't see how South Korea could possibly cover that. Is that over 3 years, 5 years? It's still a very, very large outflow. So again, without some backing some precautions, I mean that imposes enormous risk. I mean, I don't know if you'd see a run on the currency like going back to the East Asian financial crisis in the '90s. I'll just say I wouldn't rule out something like that. I'm not going to predict it, but that is a huge amount of money. I mean, I recognize South Korea is a big economy. It's been very prosperous, but even for South Korea, that would be a lot of money to flow out. And again, it would just depend on the terms. But if the terms are such that basically President Trump can dictate what comes out when, you'd be taking an enormous risk by entering into that sort of deal.
Right, exactly. So with the one already under pressure, that kind of outflow could actually really hit hard on Korea's economy. So in response to that risk, South Korea has been pushing for an unlimited currency swap agreement with Washington. But so far, there's still little progress. Do you think a swap line would meaningfully mitigate the FX pressure? And why do you think Washington is quite hesitant to move forward with one now, despite, having done in 2008 and 2020?
Yeah, it's obviously a swap line, particularly an unlimited swap line. I'd be very surprised if you were to get the Trump administration to agree to that. But an unlimited swap line, or even a substantial swap line, even if it's not unlimited, 30, 40 billion, I'm pulling those numbers out. I'd have to think more carefully what would make sense, but that would help enormously. Obviously, an unlimited swap line, that would protect you from the sort of runs that obviously South Korea and other countries saw back in the '90s. So that would be a great mitigating factor. Again, it may still not be a very good deal in terms of the trade deal, but in terms of the risk to the currency, that would protect South Korea. But again, I can understand from the standpoint of the United States that there'd be a reluctance because basically it to some extent means the United States loses control of the monetary policy, its own monetary policy, so that if Korea were to need 50, 60, 70 billion on the swap line, we would be obligated to make that available. Now, again, in the context of the U.S. economy, that's not huge, but it is a factor, and I could certainly understand the reluctance of the United States and President Trump to say, okay, unlimited swap line. I suppose if, again, Korea were to go this route, you could perhaps agree on some limited swap line, which would likely prevent the serious run on the currency. But again, I'd be very surprised if you got a commitment from President Trump for an unlimited swap line.
Right, so definitely a lot of factors weighing in. South Korea wants to reduce its risk, and Washington still wants control. So we'll really have to see how that goes. So given all these, complexities, some people here in South Korea argue that, it may actually be smarter to just take the tariff hit. What about your side? Do you think absorbing the tariffs and using public funds to directly support affected exporters could be a more pragmatic path forward?
I would absolutely say, again, from an economic standpoint, I'll come back to the security issues, which I won't claim expertise on, but I'll come back to those in a second. But from an economic standpoint, you have a lot of money in effect to play with. So if you're talking about a $350 billion commitment and you're looking to protect 130 billion a year in exports, which of course, again, it's not going to go to zero. With a 25% tariff, you'll lose some, but it's not going to go to zero. And again, the alternative is you're buying it down to 15. So you're still looking at a very substantial tariff. So what I would say is Korea would be much, much better off looking to help the workers, the firms that are most affected. Unemployment compensation, again, I can't speak to the specifics of the South Korean unemployment system, but again, you have a lot of money to help unemployed workers if you're saving 350 billion on this investment commitment. So I think that would be a much better route to go. And then again, insofar as you look at the markets, as you're going to see a smaller export market there, look to, get to other markets or reorient that to domestic demand. That's costly, but it costs much less than 350 billion. Now, on the security issues, again, something people have to be mindful of. I won't speak from expertise, but I could just say, we see very clearly Trump has made a big point that he's not going to be bound by prior commitments. We saw that very clearly in Ukraine, that he's sort of been saying, well, we'll see, we'll see, we'll see. He hasn't totally walked away from Ukraine, but obviously he's made a big point of saying he's not committed to Ukraine in the way that President Biden had. And again, that was bipartisan. So it wasn't that was just a Democratic commitment that had pretty much as much support from Republicans as from Democrats. But again, Trump has very deliberately said he's not bound in the same way. So I would just say when it comes to South Korea, I think it would be a mistake to assume that you had sort of a rock hard commitment, which may have been the case with Biden, Bush, prior presidents. That's simply not the case now. So again, I understand that Korea's very real security concerns, but I don't think that it could take for granted that it has the same support from the United States under Trump as would have been true under prior presidents.
Right. So on the economic side, when we speak only economics, that could be a good option. But we are also considering security situations. So it's a very complex situation right now. Now, in light of this, we remember that in a previous interview, you've made a very interesting suggestion that South Korea should aim for a deal that is deliberately vague. What does a strategically ambiguous agreement look like in this case, Dr. Baker, and why might that be more effective under Trump?
Well, in terms of a deal that's vague, if you make a commitment where you say, okay, we're going to shoot for 350 billion, Trump's number, as long as that's not pinned down, I mean, Korea is investing in the United States, and that's fine. That's good at both sides. You know, we know that there have been many profitable investments for Korean firms, and I expect that would continue. But if it's left more open that this will be a target that we're going to shoot for 350 billion, but it's not a binding commitment. So there's no obligation that there's going to be 70 billion a year for the next 5 years or anything of that nature. So I think that again, whether the Trump administration will agree to that, I have no idea. But I think that would be a better route to go because, again, it wouldn't necessarily commit Korea to doing anything that they might not do anyhow. It might not well be in its interest. So I think that would be a better route to look to go rather than locking in some sort of commitment. And again, I don't know what the repercussions would be not meeting the commitment because again, this administration has been on again, off again. So I'm just saying I do not know how they would deal with if you made a hard commitment and then somebody didn't meet it. I don't know what the response would be. Maybe the tariffs would go back to 25%, maybe higher. I can't really say, but it's not been an administration that's made a point of consistency. I'll just put it that way.
Right. So it could sound risky, but this ambiguity could actually be a strategic move for South Korea. Now, this brings us to, the nature of our counterpart. So you've described President Trump as a transactional, unpredictable, and ultimately unconstrained by the deals he negotiates. So given that, how should Korea shape its tactics to minimize vulnerability in this unstable framework?
Yeah, I think South Korea really has to plan for, an economy that is not dependent or as dependent, I should say, on U.S. trade. So again, not going to zero. I don't think there's a plausible story where it's going to go to zero, but to look to increase trade with other trading partners, obviously Japan, China, to my view, again, I don't know all the intricacies of Korea's involvement with China. I recognize there are issues between Korea and China, but that's the major economic power out there, major economic power in the world, really. But that having closer relations with China probably would be beneficial. And then, of course, the European Union, as well as developing countries in Latin America and Africa. So I think looking as much as possible to expand into other markets, I think is the most feasible path going forward. And again, if you're looking to be able to have some degree of certainty, what will things look like 2, 3, 4 years out? I think almost certainly you're talking about countries other than the United States, at least as long as Donald Trump's in the White House.
Right, so reducing too much dependence on Washington could be a helpful move. Now let's zoom out a little bit. So Korea is not really alone in this tariff deals. So with the EU doubling steel tariffs and China tightening its export rules, do you think we're entering a new phase of global protectionism? And how should export-reliant economies recalibrate their long-term trade strategy right now?
Yeah, it has been disconcerting. I mean, I'm just speaking myself personally, my views. I wasn't only one of the people who said, oh, free markets everywhere always, are the best outcomes. But we've definitely stepped away from that, we meaning basically the whole world. But I'm hoping, and again, I can't say this will necessarily be the case, that you'll see some consolidation with kind of the rest of the world, excluding the United States. So even though there might be more protectionist measures, I think pretty much everyone else recognizes the advantage of certainty. So one of the points, and this has been interesting because a lot of us meaning economists in the United States, we've been saying, well, tariffs are bad, tariffs are bad, tariffs are bad. But the worst thing about tariffs isn't the tariff itself; it's the uncertainty, and then of course the corruption. So if you locked in a tariff, the United States, let's say we locked in 15% tariffs, again, not my recommended policy, but let's say we did that. That wouldn't be a disaster. It wouldn't be that different than, say, the dollar fell by 15% against the other currencies in the world. It'd basically be that same story. So the tariff itself isn't a disaster. What's real problem is when they're constantly changing. And then, of course, also where you do have corruption, where you have favored companies, individuals that make arrangements, deals, bribes, whatever you want to call them. That's the big problem. So I think the rest of the world recognizes that even if you have tariffs for certain industries, that is something that they and the world could live with. The problem is that they're not locked in, that they change all the time. So I think with that recognition, Korea, the European Union, and for that matter, China, I think it's possible to move forward. Not that you'll have deals, everyone's going to be totally happy, but the big point is that you'll have things locked in so that they're not changing all the time, and that could be a basis for planning.
Right. So we should really work to make a predictable, not too unstable deals moving forward. But looking ahead to the APEC leaders meeting in Gyeongju, South Korea, just days to go, and both sides, Washington and Seoul, are under pressure to show some movement. Do you think we can realistically expect any meaningful outcome from the leaders meeting?
Well, again, the United States is going to be focused first and foremost on China. And again, I have no inside knowledge, but that's kind of blown up. So what's happened, again, what's public, if there are other things private, I can't speak to those. But what's been public is China put in new restraints on exports of rare earths, which are needed for our economy. They're very essential. And in response, Trump threatened 100% tariffs. Again, one of the unusual things of the way the Trump administration conducts its policies, this is all out in the open. So it makes it harder to move back from positions. So again, I suspect, I anticipate that Trump will try to arrange a deal. I'm not 100% sure it'll be at APEC, of course, but it's the 100% tariffs on Chinese goods would be a disaster for the United States. China, I'm sure, won't like it, but it would be a much bigger problem for the United States because that's close to an embargo of Chinese goods, which we need. I mean, over time, we can move away from them. We can't move away from them next month. So I'm assuming they'll look for a deal. I don't know if that'll occur at APEC. Now, so in terms of Korea, I think, again, unfortunately for Korea, I think that's going to be a back burner issue for the Trump administration. My guess is that they might look to have something to say, even if it's not substantive, to say we've made progress, et cetera, et cetera. But I wouldn't necessarily expect a worked out deal at the summit.
We'll really have to see, and the world will be definitely keeping close eyes on the latest developments. Now, Dr. Baker, finally, before we let you go, could you offer just one single piece of advice to South Korea's leadership at this stage? What could they focus on the most, both in their immediate next steps and in their broader strategic posture going forward?
Well, again, I'd say you have to realize who you're dealing with. Donald Trump likes to boast of things, even if there's no substance. He's been going around boasting that he has brought $18 trillion into the United States. Now, people may not be familiar with the U.S. economy. It's a large economy. That's an absurd number. I mean, if he brought in 1/10 that amount, it would be a lot. But he's saying that there's literally nothing to back that up. My reason for mentioning that is he likes to be able to boast about things. And he doesn't necessarily care if they correspond to anything that exists in the world. So if the Korean government can give him something to boast about that might not have, I was saying before, a $350 billion commitment that's not kind of really substantive. If you made it 500 billion, but it's not really substantive, made it a trillion, but it's not really substantive. He could boast about that, and that is what he cares about. That might sound crazy. I mean, the president of, the world's leading superpower, that may seem crazy, but for better or worse, I think that's the reality.
Right, so a very strategic and powerful message to end our discussion tonight. Dr. Baker, thank you so much for your insights and making time for us tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for having me on. I enjoyed it.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.